The depths of Crater Lake are a mystery unto themselves. At 1,903 feet deep, it is the deepest lake in the United States, a perfect sapphire jewel set within the collapsed caldera of Mount Mazama, a volcano that erupted with catastrophic force nearly 8,000 years ago. The water is among the clearest found anywhere on Earth, with visibility extending to depths of almost 100 feet on calm days. Scientists have marveled at its pristine nature, its isolation from groundwater and streams keeping it remarkably pure. But locals have long whispered about something else, how the lake seems to hold secrets beneath its glassy surface, how things that slip beneath those waters don't always come back up. In the summer of 1993, 12-year-old Michael Abernathy would become part of that dark folklore, another secret swallowed by the ancient caldera, another mystery that would haunt the communities surrounding Crater Lake National Park for decades to come. The Abernathy family wasn't from Oregon. They were Midwesterners David and Linda Abernathy, along with their son Michael and daughter Elaine from the small town of Atchison, Kansas. David, a high school history teacher with a passion for America's natural wonders, had been planning their Pacific Northwest vacation for nearly 2 years. The centerpiece of their journey was to be Crater Lake, with its impossibly blue waters and dramatic caldera walls rising over 2,000 feet from the lake's surface. It was supposed to be the trip of a lifetime, Linda would later tell investigators, her voice hollow with grief. David had shown the kids so many pictures, told them so many stories about the lake. Michael was especially fascinated by the geology, how it was formed, how deep it was. He'd read everything he could find about it at the library. August 17, 1993 dawned clear and warm across the Cascade Mountains. Park records would later show that temperatures reached 78 degrees by midday, pleasantly warm for the 6,188-foot elevation of Crater Lake's rim. The Abernathy family had spent the previous night at Diamond Lake Resort about 20 miles north of the park and arrived at the Crater Lake North entrance shortly after it opened at 8. Park entrance records logged their arrival: a blue 1991 Ford Taurus station wagon, 4 occupants, annual National Parks pass. The entry fee was waived. The ranger on duty remembered nothing unusual about the family. They were just one of hundreds that would pass through the gates that day, eager to witness the lake's legendary beauty. The family followed the standard tourist circuit around the rim, stopping at several viewpoints to take photos with their Kodak disposable cameras. They hiked the short Castle Crest Wildflower Trail and had lunch at the Rim Village Cafe. At approximately 2:30 p.m., they decided to hike down the Cleetwood Cove Trail, the only authorized trail that provides access to the lake shore. The Cleetwood Cove Trail descends 700 feet through a series of switchbacks carved into the caldera wall. Though less than a mile long, the trail is steep, dropping at an 11% grade with loose volcanic soil underfoot. Park literature warns visitors that while the descent might take 30 minutes, the return climb can take twice as long and is strenuous. Michael was so excited to reach the water, David Abernathy would later recall, staring blankly at the wall during his third interview with investigators. He practically ran down that trail. Linda kept calling for him to slow down. But you know how boys are at that age, full of energy, feeling invincible. 7 witnesses would later confirm seeing the Abernathy family at the boat dock at the bottom of the trail between 3:00 and 3:15 p.m. The family was preparing to take the boat tour to Wizard Island, the small volcanic cinder cone that rises from the western portion of the lake. However, they discovered the 3:00 p.m. tour was already full, and the next departure wasn't until 4. With time to kill, the family decided to explore the small shoreline area. In summer 1993, swimming was permitted at Cleetwood Cove, though the Park Service posted prominent warnings about the water's extreme cold. Even in August, Crater Lake's surface temperature rarely exceeds 55 to 60 degrees Fahrenheit. Hypothermia can set in within 30 minutes of exposure. Park Ranger Thomas Wilson was on duty at Cleetwood Cove that afternoon. In his official statement, he noted approximately 15 or 20 people swimming or wading near the shore between 3:00 and 4. He specifically remembered seeing Michael, a skinny kid with reddish-brown hair wearing blue swim trunks, because the boy had approached him with questions about the lake's depth. He was unusually interested in the scientific aspects of the lake, Wilson stated. Wanted to know about the underwater geography, whether there were any caves or tunnels under the surface. I told him about the underwater volcano called Meriam Cone and how there's still hydrothermal activity down there. His eyes just lit up at that. At approximately 3:40 p.m., according to multiple witness statements, Michael entered the water for the second or third time. His sister Elaine, then 14, was sitting on a rock reading a paperback novel. David was talking with another tourist about camera equipment. Linda had walked back up the trail about 50 yards to use the restroom facilities. Jason Whitaker, a 20-year-old college student from Portland who was swimming nearby, would provide the most detailed account of what happened next. The kid was a strong swimmer, Whitaker told detectives. I noticed that because most people just kind of wade in and out quickly. It's frigid, you know? But he was actually swimming parallel to the shore, maybe 15-20 feet out. Then I saw him stop and tread water for a minute, like he was looking at something. Next thing I know, he takes a deep breath and dives down. I didn't think much of it at first. Figured he'd pop back up in a few seconds. But Michael Abernathy didn't resurface. Whitaker estimated that approximately 30-40 seconds passed before he realized something might be wrong. He called out to some nearby swimmers, asking if they'd seen where the red-haired kid had gone. When no one had, Whitaker began to feel uneasy. I swam over to where I'd last seen him and dove down myself, but visibility was limited, maybe 30 feet at most, and it gets dark quick. The lake bottom drops off like a cliff not far from shore. I couldn't see anything. By 3:47 p.m., just 7 minutes after Michael was last seen, a full-scale emergency response was underway. Ranger Wilson radioed for backup while organizing the bystanders into a search line in the water. David Abernathy dove repeatedly into the lake, screaming his son's name, until hypothermia began to set in, and 2 other men had to forcibly bring him back to shore. Elaine sat frozen on her rock, the paperback fallen from her hands, watching the scene unfold as if in a nightmare. Linda, returning from the restroom, collapsed at the shoreline when she understood what was happening. Park Service dive teams arrived within 40 minutes and began a systematic underwater search. By 5:00 p.m., additional resources had been called in, including a Coast Guard helicopter from North Bend, Oregon. Though everyone understood the reality, this was not a rescue operation but a recovery mission. If Michael was underwater, survival beyond 15-20 minutes was virtually impossible in the cold conditions. The search continued until darkness made it too dangerous to proceed. It resumed at first light the next day, and for 7 consecutive days thereafter, specialized deep-water equipment was brought in. Side-scan sonar swept the underwater slopes near Cleetwood Cove. A remote-operated submersible was deployed to search depths beyond the reach of human divers. They found nothing. No body, no clothing, no physical evidence that Michael Abernathy had ever entered those crystalline waters. By August 25, the official search was scaled back, though periodic sweeps would continue through September. The case transitioned from an active search to a missing persons investigation. The Klamath County Sheriff's Department took the lead, working in conjunction with National Park Service law enforcement rangers. What followed was a textbook investigation that slowly expanded beyond the boundaries of the lake itself. Detectives interviewed more than 75 witnesses who had been at Crater Lake that day. They scrutinized the Abernathy family background, examined phone records, bank statements, and school reports. They explored every conceivable scenario: accident, abduction, voluntary disappearance, even potential family involvement. Detective Lawrence Montgomery, who would later become known for his work on the infamous Redmond triple homicide case, spent 3 months as lead investigator on the Abernathy disappearance. It was a profoundly frustrating case, Montgomery would write in his memoir years later. When a child goes missing, you typically have something to work with: evidence of foul play, a history of family problems, a witness who saw something suspicious. In this case, we had a seemingly normal, happy family on vacation. Dozens of witnesses who saw the boy swimming 1 minute and gone the next, and a 20-mile-wide lake with nearly unfathomable depths. It was as if the earth had simply opened up and swallowed him. The investigation uncovered no red flags in the Abernathy family history. David and Linda had been married for 16 years, were active in their community, and were by all accounts devoted parents. Financial records showed modest teachers' salaries and a mortgage on a small 3-bedroom home in Atchison. Michael was described by teachers and friends as intelligent, curious, and well-adjusted. His school records showed consistently good grades and no behavior issues. A search of the family computer, still relatively uncommon in 1993, revealed nothing unusual, just school projects, family photos, and a few simple games. The only potentially noteworthy detail emerged from Michael's school notebooks. His science teacher provided investigators with a project Michael had completed the previous spring about volcanoes and geothermal features. Several pages were dedicated to Crater Lake, including hand-drawn diagrams of theoretical underwater caves and tunnels that might exist in the caldera walls. The kid had an active imagination and a genuine interest in geology, Montgomery noted, but there was nothing to suggest he planned to disappear or put himself in danger. It was just a school project, the kind of thing a bright 12-year-old would do. As 1993 drew to a close, the active investigation was gradually downgraded. The Abernathy family returned to Kansas, their lives irrevocably shattered. David took an extended leave of absence from teaching. Linda began seeing a psychiatrist for severe depression and anxiety. Elaine, the once outgoing teenager, became withdrawn and refused to discuss her brother or the events at Crater Lake. The case file remained open but inactive for the next several years. Like so many missing persons cases, it became a ghost in the system, periodically reviewed when new detectives were assigned or when similar cases emerged, but with no fresh leads or evidence to pursue. Then came an unexpected development that would reignite public interest in the case, though not until nearly 7 years after Michael's disappearance. In June 2000, a research team from Oregon State University was conducting a bathymetric survey of Crater Lake, using advanced sonar equipment to create detailed maps of the lake bottom. The primary goal was scientific, to better understand the underwater topography and hydrothermal features of the caldera. But Dr. Eleanor Voss, the lead geologist, was also familiar with the Abernathy case. "We kept the sonar logs running continuously," Dr. Voss explained in a later interview, "and we paid special attention to the areas near Cleetwood Cove, on the off chance we might detect anything unusual. What they found wasn't a body, but it was unusual enough to warrant further investigation." Approximately 250 feet offshore from Cleetwood Cove, at a depth of about 170 feet, the sonar detected what appeared to be a small opening in the caldera wall, a crevice or possibly a cave entrance that wasn't documented in previous surveys. Due to funding limitations and the specialized equipment needed to investigate further, the anomaly was simply noted in the team's report. That report made its way to the National Park Service, where it eventually caught the attention of Ranger Wilson, who had been present on the day of Michael's disappearance and had never forgotten the case. Wilson pushed for a follow-up investigation, but budget constraints and competing priorities delayed any action. The discovery remained essentially a footnote until 2003, when a PBS documentary team received permission to film a segment about Crater Lake's underwater features for a series on America's national parks. The documentary crew hired a technical diving team specialized in deep, cold water exploration. Among them was Alexander "Alex" Kowalski, a former Navy diver with extensive experience in underwater cave systems. On July 12, 2003, Kowalski and his team made their first descent to investigate the anomaly detected by Dr. Voss's team. What they found would add a bizarre new chapter to the already mysterious case. The sonar was accurate. There is a narrow fissure in the rock face at that location, Kowalski reported after the dive. It's about 3 feet wide at its largest point, and it extends horizontally into the caldera wall for an undetermined distance. We were able to penetrate approximately 40 feet before the passage became too constricted for safe exploration with our equipment. Kowalski's team found no evidence directly linked to Michael Abernathy, but they did discover something unexpected. The fissure appeared to connect to a larger system of narrow channels within the caldera wall, potentially formed by ancient lava tubes or fractures in the volcanic rock. More significantly, they detected a slight but measurable current flowing into the fissure, suggesting water was moving through the system, perhaps connected to the hydrothermal activity known to exist deep beneath the lake. The discovery sparked renewed interest in the Abernathy case. Could a 12-year-old boy diving down on a whim have discovered this underwater opening? Could he have been caught by the current and pulled inside? The scientific team considered it unlikely, but not impossible. The entrance was deep, 70 feet below the surface, but not beyond the theoretical reach of an exceptional freediver, even a young one. However, most experts doubted a 12-year-old could hold his breath long enough to reach such depths, let alone have the strength to fight against a current if he became trapped. Nevertheless, the Park Service authorized a more thorough exploration of the underwater fissure. Throughout the fall of 2003, 3 additional dives were conducted, with teams mapping approximately 200 feet of narrow, twisting passages. They found no human remains or personal effects. The system appeared to extend deeper into the caldera wall, but sections became too narrow for divers to safely navigate, even with specialized equipment. The renewed investigation might have ended there, another tantalizing but ultimately inconclusive chapter in the Abernathy mystery, if not for a completely unexpected discovery. The following year, on August 17, 2004, exactly 11 years to the day after Michael's disappearance, a research dive was being conducted near Phantom Ship, a small island on the opposite side of the lake from Cleetwood Cove. The dive had no connection to the Abernathy case. It was part of an ongoing study of microbial mats growing around hydrothermal vents on the lake bottom. The dive team consisted of Dr. Harriet Mills, a microbiologist from the University of Washington, and 2 technical divers, James Forrester and Vincent Woon. They were working at a depth of approximately 350 feet, collecting samples from a previously identified hydrothermal area, when Forrester noticed something reflecting his dive light from a rocky outcropping about 10 feet away. Initially thinking it might be a discarded piece of equipment from a previous research expedition, Forrester swam over to investigate. What he found defied logical explanation. Wedged in a narrow crevice between 2 rocks was a pocket watch. Not a modern timepiece, but an old-fashioned mechanical watch with an ornate gold case and a long chain. When Forrester carefully extracted it from its resting place, he was shocked to discover that the watch appeared to be in pristine condition, no visible corrosion or damage, despite being underwater. Even more incredibly, when he held it to his ear, he could hear a faint but distinct ticking. Forrester secured the watch in a sample container and completed the planned dive. Back on the research vessel, the team examined their unexpected find. The watch was indeed still running. The case was engraved with intricate scrollwork and bore a small manufacturer's mark, identifying it as a product of the Wellington Watch Company of Bristol, England, a firm that had ceased operations in. But it was when they opened the case that the discovery took an even more disturbing turn. Inside the cover was an inscription: "For Michael on his 12th birthday. May you always have time for adventure. Love, Grandpa Thomas." 19. News of the discovery sent shockwaves through the law enforcement and scientific communities. The watch was immediately secured as evidence and transported to the Oregon State Police Crime Laboratory in Salem for analysis. The Klamath County Sheriff's Department reopened the Abernathy case file. David and Linda Abernathy were notified, and they confirmed that Michael had indeed received a pocket watch from his maternal grandfather, Thomas Winters, for his 12th birthday in November. He treasured that watch, Linda told detectives during a painful phone interview. He didn't carry it every day. We worried it was too valuable, but he insisted on bringing it on our trip. He said he wanted to take a photo holding it at Crater Lake to send to his grandfather. The mystery deepened when preliminary forensic analysis confirmed the watch was indeed manufactured circa 1910-1915, consistent with a family heirloom. More baffling was the condition. While there was some evidence of exposure to water, the watch showed nowhere near the level of deterioration expected after 11 years of submersion in even the purest lake water. Most inexplicably, the watch mechanism was still functioning, though running slow by approximately 40 minutes per day. "It's technically impossible," stated Harold Jenkins, a master watchmaker consulted by investigators. "Even the finest mechanical watches need to be wound every 24 to 48 hours. The mainspring simply cannot store enough energy to run for years, let alone a decade. And submersion in water should have caused immediate damage to the mechanism. I have no scientific explanation for this." Some speculated that perhaps the watch hadn't been underwater for the full 11 years, that someone had placed it there more recently. But this theory raised more questions than it answered. Who would have had Michael's watch? Why place it in such a remote, nearly inaccessible location? And how could they have done so without specialized diving equipment? The discovery of the watch transformed what had been a tragic but relatively straightforward missing persons case into something far more perplexing. Local and national media seized on the story. The mystery of the ticking watch found in the depths of Crater Lake, exactly 11 years after Michael's disappearance, became the subject of news specials, documentary segments, and endless internet speculation. Theories proliferated, ranging from the plausible to the fantastic. Some suggested that Michael had never drowned at all, that he had been abducted from elsewhere in the park, and the swimming incident staged as a cover. But this failed to account for multiple eyewitness reports of him diving into the lake and not resurfacing. Others proposed that Michael might have discovered an air pocket or cave system beneath the lake that allowed him to survive for some period, placing the watch where it was found before succumbing to exposure or injury. But the location of the watch over 5 miles from where Michael disappeared and at a depth of 350 feet made this scenario highly improbable. The more scientifically inclined suggested that unique chemical properties of Crater Lake's water, combined with unusual geothermal conditions near the hydrothermal vent, might have created an environment that somehow preserved the watch and its mechanism. But no known combination of natural conditions could explain a mechanical watch continuing to run for 11 years without being wound. And inevitably, in the darker corners of internet forums and late-night radio shows, supernatural explanations emerged. Time distortions within the ancient volcano, a parallel dimension intersecting with our own, or the restless spirit of a child trying to send a message from beyond. For the Abernathy family, the discovery of the watch brought not closure, but a reopening of wounds that had never fully healed. David, who had returned to teaching in 1995 but remained a shadow of his former self, took early retirement after the watch was found. Linda, who had slowly rebuilt some semblance of a life through therapy and community support, began experiencing panic attacks again. Elaine, who had gone on to college and was working as a graphic designer in Chicago, refused all media requests and told her parents she didn't want to hear any updates about the case. Finding that watch was like losing him all over again, David confided to a close friend. "At least before, we could tell ourselves that it was a tragic accident, that he drowned like the investigators said, and his body was just never recovered because of the lake's depth. But now I don't know what to think. What happened to my boy? Where has he been all these years? Could he possibly be still alive somewhere?" The investigation entered a new phase following the watch discovery. A specialized FBI dive team was brought in to conduct a comprehensive search of the area where the watch was found. They discovered no additional evidence related to Michael, but did document an unusual feature in the lake bottom about 30 feet from the watch location. A narrow, vertical shaft extending downward into the lake bed, too small for human entry, but large enough to create a noticeable current. Geologists identified it as likely being a hydrothermal vent channel, part of the complex system that circulates water through the volcanic structures beneath the lake. Voss, now heading a dedicated research project focused on Crater Lake's hydrothermal systems, proposed a theory that these vents might be interconnected, potentially creating a network of water circulation throughout the caldera. We are discovering that Crater Lake is far more complex beneath the surface than previously understood, Dr. Voss explained during a press conference in September 2004. The volcanic structures that form the caldera aren't solid, monolithic formations. They are riddled with channels, fissures, and chambers created during the original eruption and modified by subsequent geological processes. Some of these connect to the hydrothermal system, creating what we might think of as a circulatory system for the lake. This scientific assessment led to a new, if still implausible, theory. Could Michael's watch and possibly other evidence have been transported through this underwater circulatory system from Cleetwood Cove to the Phantom Ship area? The distance was substantial, and the pathways would need to be remarkably unobstructed. But it represented the most rational explanation for how the watch could have traveled so far from Michael's last known location. But it did nothing to explain the watch's preserved condition or its continued operation. As 2004 drew to a close, the investigation reached another impasse. Every conventional avenue had been explored. The watch had yielded no fingerprints or DNA evidence beyond confirmation that it had been handled by Michael. The underwater searchers had discovered fascinating geological features, but no further clues to the boy's fate. In December, Klamath County Sheriff Robert Hendricks held a somber press conference. The Abernathy investigation would remain open, he announced, but would again be classified as inactive pending new evidence. Resources would be redirected to more recently active cases. The mystery of Michael Abernathy and his inexplicably preserved pocket watch would join the annals of America's most perplexing unsolved disappearances. For most of the public, the story gradually faded from headlines. But for a dedicated few, including Thomas Wilson, now retired from the Park Service, but still haunted by the memory of the curious boy who asked him about underwater caves, and Detective Montgomery, who had never accepted the lack of resolution in the case, the search for answers continued. And beneath the sapphire surface of Crater Lake, where sunlight penetrates only so far before surrendering to the ancient darkness below, whatever secrets remained about Michael Abernathy's fate continued to lie hidden, waiting to be discovered. As winter descended on Crater Lake National Park, bringing heavy snows that would close most access roads until spring, the case file was physically archived but digitally uploaded to the National Missing and Unidentified Persons System, NamUs, a relatively new database launched in 2007 to help track and potentially solve America's growing number of missing persons cases. The file contained hundreds of witness statements, search reports, geological surveys, and forensic analyses. It held photographs of a smiling boy with reddish-brown hair and a splash of freckles across his nose, school records showing his fascination with natural wonders, and family statements describing his excitement about seeing Crater Lake. And now it contained detailed documentation of a mechanically impossible discovery, a pocket watch, that by all scientific understanding should not have survived, let alone continued to function, after 11 years at the bottom of America's deepest lake. The last entry in the digital file, dated December 31, 2004, was a short note added by Detective Montgomery before his retirement. The ticking of Michael Abernathy's watch continues to echo from the depths. The question remains, is it counting down to something, or counting up from the moment time stopped making sense in this case? Perhaps, like the watch itself, the answer lies somewhere in Crater Lake, waiting in the darkness to be found. 4 years passed after the discovery of Michael Abernathy's inexplicably preserved pocket watch. 4 years during which the case lay dormant in official channels while quietly gathering momentum in other, less conventional forums. The mystery had captured the imagination of amateur sleuths, paranormal investigators, and geology enthusiasts across the country. Websites dedicated to the case proliferated. Self-published books offering theories ranging from scientific to supernatural appeared on obscure online marketplaces. A small but dedicated community formed around the enigma of the boy who vanished into America's deepest lake and the watch that seemingly defied the laws of physics. One member of this community was Nathaniel Harlow, a 32-year-old hydrologist who had become obsessed with the case after reading about it in a 2005 scientific journal. Harlow specialized in subterranean water systems and had spent the previous 3 years using his vacation time to visit Crater Lake, gathering data and developing a comprehensive map of what he believed might be an extensive network of underwater tunnels and chambers within the caldera walls. Conventional geology dismisses the possibility of large, navigable caves in this type of volcanic structure. Harlow explained in a 2008 paper that was rejected by mainstream scientific journals but found an audience online. But the evidence suggests otherwise. The hydrothermal vents, the unexplained currents, the anomalous temperature gradients I have documented, they all point to something much more complex than isolated fissures in the rock. Harlow's theories gained little traction in the scientific community, but they resonated with those who believed Michael Abernathy's disappearance and the subsequent discovery of his watch involved more than a simple drowning accident. By early 2008, Harlow had gathered enough private funding from interested parties to finance a series of specialized dives using equipment designed specifically to navigate narrow underwater passages. Fate intervened before these expeditions could begin. On March 12, 2008, a magnitude 4.2 earthquake struck near Crater Lake, not a major seismic event by Oregon standards, but significant enough to trigger small landslides around the caldera rim. More importantly, park rangers reported unusual activity in the lake itself, localized turbulence, water discoloration in several areas, and most dramatically a temporary but measurable drop in the lake's water level of approximately 3 inches, followed by a rapid return to normal. Geologists attributed these phenomena to shifting hydrothermal vents beneath the lakebed. But for Harlow, it represented something more: potential confirmation of his theory about interconnected cave systems that could be affected by seismic activity. The earthquake effectively performed an experiment no human could have designed, Harlow wrote in his online journal. It pressurized the entire underground system simultaneously, forcing water through channels that may have been partially blocked for decades or even centuries. What we observed on the surface was just the external manifestation of a much more significant event happening beneath the lake. Harlow's theory might have remained just another speculative footnote in the Abernathy case, if not for what happened 2 weeks after the earthquake. On March 30, 2008, Diane Powell, a 45-year-old administrative assistant from Eugene, Oregon, was hiking with her dog along the Pacific Crest Trail approximately 7 miles southeast of Crater Lake National Park. The area was still largely snow-covered, but recent warm weather had created patchy conditions with bare ground exposed in sun-facing clearings. In one such clearing, Powell's dog became agitated, digging frantically at something partially exposed in the recently thawed soil. Powell's initial assumption that the dog had found animal remains proved horrifyingly incorrect. What emerged from the muddy earth was a child's shoe, a blue Nike sneaker, size 5, containing what appeared to be human foot bones. Oregon State Police secured the scene within hours. Forensic technicians recovered not just the shoe and its grim contents, but fragments of fabric consistent with denim jeans, and what was later identified as a heavily degraded disposable Kodak camera of the type popular in the early. DNA testing would confirm what many immediately suspected. The remains belonged to Michael Abernathy. After 15 years, the missing boy had been found not in the depths of Crater Lake, but on a forested hillside nearly 8 miles from where he had disappeared. The discovery raised far more questions than it answered. How had Michael's remains traveled from the lake to this remote location? The terrain between Cleetwood Cove and the recovery site included sheer caldera walls rising over 1,000 feet, dense forests and rugged wilderness with no maintained trails. Even if someone had removed his body from the lake, why transport it to such an inaccessible location? And why had only partial remains been found? Most perplexing of all, how did this discovery relate to the perfectly preserved pocket watch found ticking at the bottom of the lake 4 years earlier? The investigation roared back to life. The Oregon State Police assigned a dedicated task force to the case, working in conjunction with the FBI's evidence response team. The recovery site was expanded to a half-mile radius, with teams meticulously searching every square foot of the area. Ground-penetrating radar was deployed. Cadaver dogs worked in grid patterns. Geological experts assessed the soil composition and drainage patterns. Additional remains were recovered, approximately 40% of a human skeleton, including partial ribcage, vertebrae, and fragments of both legs. All were consistent with a male child approximately 12 years of age. The bones showed significant weathering and animal scavenging, consistent with having been exposed to the elements for an extended period. But the most significant discovery came not from the bones themselves, but from the soil surrounding them. Analysis revealed high concentrations of minerals, typically found in deep lake sediments, including unique diatom species specific to Crater Lake's ecosystem. Even more telling, trace evidence of hydrothermal activity, including sulfur compounds and mineral formations that could only have formed in proximity to underwater vents. The soil evidence tells an impossible story, stated Dr. Amelia Kowalczyk, the lead forensic geologist assigned to the case. These remains appear to have been immersed in the deepest parts of Crater Lake, exposed to hydrothermal activity, and somehow transported through solid rock to a location miles from the shore. From a conventional geological perspective, this simply cannot happen. Yet the evidence suggested it had. Nathaniel Harlow's theories suddenly gained mainstream attention. His previously rejected paper was now being circulated among serious scientific researchers. The National Park Service, which had denied his previous request to conduct exploratory dives in the lake, now reached out to collaborate. By May 2008, a joint scientific and law enforcement expedition was being organized, the most comprehensive exploration of Crater Lake's depths ever attempted. While preparations for this expedition were underway, investigators pursued another angle: the possibility that human intervention, not geological phenomena, explained the mysterious discoveries. Had someone removed Michael's body from the lake years ago and deliberately placed parts of his remains at the remote hillside location? If so, who and why? The Abernathy family came under renewed scrutiny, though investigators found no evidence suggesting their involvement. David and Linda had divorced in 2001, both psychologically shattered by their son's disappearance. David had moved to Missouri, remarried, and by all accounts built a quiet, unremarkable life teaching at a community college. Linda still lived in the same house in Atchison, Kansas, working part-time at a local library and maintaining a small shrine to Michael in what had been his bedroom. Elaine had changed her name after college and deliberately disconnected from both parents and her past. It took investigators 3 weeks just to locate her in Seattle, where she worked as a user interface designer for a software company. None of the family members had the specialized diving skills necessary to recover a body from Crater Lake's depths. None had any meaningful connection to the area where the remains were found, and psychological assessments indicated all three were still traumatized by the loss in ways consistent with innocence rather than guilt. Attention turned to others who might have had both opportunity and capability. Former Park Service employees were interviewed. Records of local dive clubs and technical diving certifications were reviewed. Individuals known to have been at Crater Lake during key periods: the day of Michael's disappearance, the days before the watch was found, the weeks following the 2008 earthquake, were identified and questioned. No viable suspects emerged. The case remained, at its core, a scientific mystery rather than a criminal one. On June 15, 2008, the much-anticipated expedition to explore Crater Lake's depths began. The team included experts in technical diving, geology, hydrology, forensic science, and underwater archaeology. They brought with them state-of-the-art equipment, including prototype remotely operated vehicles, ROVs designed to navigate narrow passages, 3D mapping technology, and specialized cameras capable of operating at extreme depths. The expedition focused on three primary areas: the underwater fissure near Cleetwood Cove, where Michael had disappeared, the area near Phantom Ship, where his watch had been found, and a newly identified zone of hydrothermal activity midway between these locations, which had become more prominent following the March earthquake. What they discovered would rewrite scientific understanding of Crater Lake's structure and add yet another bewildering chapter to the Abernathy mystery. The expedition's first major breakthrough came on day 4, when ROA exploration of the fissure near Cleetwood Cove revealed that what had appeared to be a dead-end tunnel actually contained a narrow vertical shaft, descending at least 200 feet deeper into the caldera wall. The passage was too constricted for human divers to navigate safely, but the ROA was able to follow it to a depth of approximately 370 feet below the lake surface before encountering a larger chamber. This chamber, subsequently named Abernathy Cavern, in official reports measured roughly 30 feet in diameter and showed clear evidence of regular water flow. More significantly, it connected to at least 3 additional passages leading in different directions, one appearing to descend deeper into the caldera, one extending horizontally along the caldera wall, and one angling upward at approximately 40 degrees. What we are seeing defies conventional understanding of how calderas form, stated Dr. Voss, who had joined the expedition as lead geologist. These appear to be ancient lava tubes, modified and expanded by hydrothermal activity over thousands of years. The water circulation through this network is creating, in effect, a subterranean river system within the crater walls. Over the next 2 weeks, the expedition mapped more than 3 miles of interconnected passages. Some were barely wide enough for the ROV to navigate. Others opened into cathedral-like chambers with ceilings rising 50 feet or more. Throughout the system, they documented powerful water currents, some flowing fast enough to propel objects or potentially a human body through the network. The most stunning discovery came on June 28, when the team sent an ROV into a narrow ascending passage that began near the hydrothermal zone between Cleetwood Cove and Phantom Ship. After navigating almost a mile of twisting tunnel, the ROV emerged not into another underwater chamber, but into a small air-filled cave with a pool of water at its base. Infrared sensors on the ROV detected an ambient temperature of 76 degrees Fahrenheit, significantly warmer than the surrounding rock would suggest. Atmospheric analysis showed breathable air likely refreshed through small fissures connecting to the surface. Most importantly, the cave appeared to have a narrow passage leading away from the lake. The implications were staggering. The expedition had discovered not just an underwater cave system, but a potential pathway from the depths of Crater Lake to the surrounding forest, one that included segments where a person could potentially survive. The expedition's focus immediately shifted to tracing this pathway to its terminus. Additional ROVs were deployed to map different sections simultaneously. Technical divers pushed the limits of their equipment to reach chambers that might connect to the newly discovered system. Ground teams began systematic searches of the forest above areas where cave passages appeared to be trending. On July 7, 2008, a ground team discovered what appeared to be a small sinkhole in a clearing, approximately 6.5 miles from the lake shore and less than 2 miles from where Michael's remains had been found. The depression was partially obscured by vegetation and showed signs of recent collapse, possibly triggered by the March earthquake. When team members cleared away loose soil and rocks, they found a narrow vertical shaft descending approximately 15 feet to a small chamber. From this chamber, a passage sloped downward in the direction of the lake. Air flowing from the passage was warm and humid, with trace mineral content matching samples taken from the air-filled cave discovered by the ROV. They had found the other end of the system, a literal underground river flowing from the depths of Crater Lake through miles of caverns and tunnels to emerge in the forest beyond. Subsequent exploration would confirm what many now suspected. The underground system created a navigable, if incredibly hazardous, route from the lake to the forest, where Michael's remains had been found. Under normal conditions, powerful water currents made much of the system impassable, but the March 2008 earthquake had temporarily disrupted these flows, potentially exposing sections that had been submerged for years and dislodging material including human remains that had been trapped within the network. The scientific implications were revolutionary. The legal and investigative conclusions were both simpler and more tragic. On August 12, 2008, the Klamath County Sheriff's Department held a press conference announcing their official determination in the Abernathy case. Based on all available evidence, they concluded that Michael had indeed drowned in Crater Lake on August 7. His body had been drawn into an underwater fissure by natural currents and trapped within the extensive cave system beneath the caldera. The March 2008 earthquake had dislodged his partial remains, which were then carried through the system to eventually emerge near where they were discovered. As for the watch, its preservation and continued operation remained scientifically inexplicable. Analysis of the cave environment had revealed unusual combinations of minerals and gases, some of which might have preservative properties, but nothing could account for a mechanical watch continuing to run for 11 years without being wound. That element of the case was officially classified as undetermined in the final report. For most officials involved, the case was now closed. A death certificate was issued for Michael Abernathy, listing the cause as accidental drowning. His recovered remains were returned to his parents for burial. The story gradually faded from headlines, replaced by newer mysteries and tragedies. But for some, the discoveries at Crater Lake raised more questions than they answered, questions that would lead to even more disturbing revelations in the years that followed. Nathaniel Harlow was not satisfied with the official conclusion. The discovery of the cave system had validated his theories, but he believed important elements of the case remained unexplored. After the official expedition ended, he continued his research independently, focusing particularly on historical records related to Crater Lake and similar disappearances in the area. What he found in dusty archives and forgotten local newspapers suggested a pattern spanning more than a century. In 1898, a 14-year-old local boy named Joseph Williamson vanished while fishing from a small boat on the lake. His empty boat was found drifting near Wizard Island. In 1924, a young female photographer, Emma Hollister, disappeared while taking pictures near the lake shore. Her camera was later found at the water's edge, but her body was never recovered. In 1956, 10-year-old Timothy Lawrence went missing during a family camping trip. He was last seen walking toward Cleetwood Cove. Despite an extensive search, no trace of him was ever found. In 1979, university student Philip Gaines vanished while scuba diving in the lake. Other divers reported he had been exploring an interesting rock formation shortly before his disappearance. Harlow documented 17 cases between 1898 and 1993 that shared similar characteristics. Individuals who disappeared in or near Crater Lake, mostly children or young adults, with no bodies recovered despite extensive searches. In most cases, official records attributed the disappearances to drowning, exposure, or misadventure, but taken together they formed a disturbing pattern centered around the lake and spanning generations. Even more unsettling were the local legends Harlow uncovered through interviews with elderly residents of communities surrounding the park. Stories passed down through families of Native American descent spoke of the lake as a thin place where the boundary between worlds was permeable. Colonial-era trappers and settlers had avoided camping near the lake, believing it to be haunted by the spirits of those lost in its waters. In the early 20th century, a small religious sect had briefly established itself near the southern rim, drawn by beliefs that the lake contained a gateway to another realm of existence. Most of these stories could be dismissed as folklore or superstition, but Harlow found one historical account that seemed to bridge the gap between legend and the physical evidence discovered in the personal papers of William Gladstone Steele, the conservationist whose advocacy had been instrumental in establishing Crater Lake National Park in 1902. Harlow discovered a journal entry, dated August 1886, 17 years before the park's official founding. In it, Steele described an encounter with an elderly Klamath tribal elder who showed him a place where the water goes into the mountain and comes out in the forest beyond. Steele had documented approximate coordinates and his unsuccessful attempt to explore the location, noting that the current proved too strong for safe navigation, but that he observed a peculiar distortion of light beneath the surface, as if time itself moved differently in those waters. Steele's journal contained a crude map that, when overlaid with modern GPS coordinates, aligned with both the underwater fissure near Cleetwood Cove and the forest location where Michael's remains had been discovered. Harlow published his findings in a self-funded monograph in 2010, titled The Crater Lake Passages: Time, Water, and Disappearances. The work received little mainstream attention, but developed a cult following among those interested in unexplained phenomena. Most scientists dismissed his broader theories about temporal anomalies within the cave system, focusing instead on the valuable hydrological data his research had uncovered. But one person who took Harlow's work seriously was former Detective Lawrence Montgomery, now retired and suffering from early-onset dementia. Montgomery had never forgotten the Abernathy case, and had continued to collect information about it even after leaving the force. When he read Harlow's monograph, something clicked in his deteriorating memory, a detail from the original investigation that suddenly seemed critically important. In July 2010, Montgomery contacted Harlow, requesting a meeting. The two men spent 3 days reviewing every aspect of the case, with Montgomery struggling against his failing memory to retrieve the detail that had disturbed him. On the third day, while discussing the forensic analysis of Michael's recovered remains, Montgomery suddenly stopped, his eyes widening with recognition. "The growth plates," he said. "I need to see the reports on the growth plates in the bones." Harlow, through his scientific connections, managed to obtain copies of the forensic anthropologist's detailed analysis of Michael's remains. Montgomery's suspicion proved correct. The growth plates in the recovered bones indicated a biological age of approximately 15 to 16 years, not the 12 years that Michael had been when he disappeared. The finding had been noted in the original forensic report but dismissed as an anomaly, possibly resulting from unusual mineral exposure in the cave environment, affecting the bone development, or simply as an error in the analysis. Given the partial and degraded nature of the remains, precise aging was difficult. But for Montgomery and Harlow, it suggested something far more disturbing: the possibility that Michael Abernathy had not died immediately after disappearing into Crater Lake, that he might have survived somewhere perhaps within the cave system for 3 to 4 years after his disappearance. This theory gained unexpected support in 2012, when a geology student named Fiona Brennan discovered something unusual while analyzing mineral samples collected from Abernathy Cavern during the 2008 expedition. Several stalactites in the air-filled portion of the cave system showed what appeared to be tool marks, scrapes, and cuts that could not have formed naturally. More compelling still were the faint but distinct patterns scratched into the cave wall near these stalactites, crude tallies arranged in groups of 5, hundreds of them, potentially representing days marked by someone trapped within the cave. Carbon dating of mineral deposits overlaying these scratches suggested they had been made sometime between. Had Michael Abernathy survived his plunge into Crater Lake, been drawn into the fissure near Cleetwood Cove, and somehow found his way to the air-filled chambers deep within the system? Had he lived there for months or even years, marking days on the wall, surviving on whatever the cave environment provided? And if so, what had ultimately caused his death and the dispersal of his remains within the system? The questions were haunting, but some answers would come from an unexpected source. In December 2014, Elaine Abernathy, now using her married name Elaine Westbrook, reached out to Nathaniel Harlow. After reading his monograph, she had distanced herself from the case for years, refusing to discuss her brother or the circumstances of his disappearance. But Harlow's research had stirred something in her memory, something she had repressed for more than 2 decades. "I saw something that day at the lake," she told Harlow during their first phone conversation. "Something I couldn't process as a 14-year-old. Something so strange I convinced myself I had imagined it. But after reading about the cave system, about the possibility that Michael survived initially, I need to tell someone what I saw." According to Elaine, she had not been reading on the rock as witnesses reported when Michael disappeared. She had actually been watching him swim, concerned about how far from shore he was venturing. When he dove beneath the surface, she saw something that defied explanation. The water around where he had submerged began to shimmer with an unusual light, and for a brief moment she could see him suspended beneath the surface, not swimming, but floating as if in zero gravity, his eyes open but unfocused, a strange expression on his face. The vision lasted only seconds before the water returned to normal. Confused and frightened, Elaine had initially frozen, unable to process what she had seen. By the time she called out to her father, Michael had vanished completely. In the chaos that followed, and under persistent questioning from investigators, she had convinced herself that the strange light and her brother's suspended state had been a hallucination, brought on by stress and grief. But it wasn't, she insisted to Harlow. "I saw him in some kind of, I don't know what to call it, a bubble of different time. A moment where physics stopped working normally. Whatever it was, he was alive in that moment, conscious but not struggling. And I have always wondered if that means he remained alive afterward, somewhere we couldn't reach him." Elaine's account might have been dismissed as the product of trauma and magical thinking if not for what happened next. In January 2015, inspired by Elaine's story, Harlow organized a small, privately funded expedition to place long-term monitoring equipment in accessible portions of the cave system. The goal was to document the unusual environmental conditions over an extended period, potentially capturing data that might explain the anomalies associated with the case. Among the equipment deployed were several high-definition cameras placed in the air-filled chamber discovered in 2008. These cameras were programmed to capture images at regular intervals, and when triggered by motion, with data stored locally and periodically retrieved by research teams. On March 17, 2015, exactly 7 years after the earthquake that had led to the discovery of Michael's remains, one of these cameras captured something extraordinary. At precisely 3:40 p.m., the same time Michael had disappeared into the lake 22 years earlier, the water in the pool at the base of the chamber began to shimmer with an unusual luminescence. The camera's light sensors recorded a brief but dramatic spike across multiple wavelengths, and for approximately 7.2 seconds, the footage showed a human figure partially emerging from the pool. The figure appeared to be that of a teenage boy with reddish-brown hair. He was visible only from the shoulders up, and the image quality was poor due to the unusual lighting conditions. But 3 independent facial recognition analyses later confirmed what Harlow instantly suspected. The figure had the same basic facial structure as Michael Abernathy, though appearing several years older than when he disappeared. Most disturbing of all, the figure seemed to be looking directly at the camera, his expression a mixture of confusion and recognition, before the light faded and the pool returned to its normal state. The footage, soon dubbed the Abernathy Apparition, became the subject of intense scientific debate. Some experts claimed it was an elaborate hoax, though they could not explain how it could have been executed in such a remote location with equipment that had been continuously monitored. Others suggested it might be a product of unique atmospheric conditions in the cave, creating a mirage-like effect. A few proposed more radical theories involving quantum phenomena and localized temporal distortions. For the Abernathy family, the footage represented something both comforting and profoundly disturbing. Potential evidence that Michael had not died immediately, that he might have continued to exist in some form within the mysterious cave system. But it also raised the agonizing possibility that he had been conscious and aware during his ordeal, perhaps for years, trapped in an environment humans were never meant to inhabit. In April 2015, David and Linda Abernathy visited Crater Lake together, for the first time since their son's disappearance. They did not attempt to enter the cave system, which remained largely inaccessible without specialized equipment. Instead, they stood at the shore of Cleetwood Cove, looking out over the impossibly blue waters that had taken their son 22 years earlier. Whatever happened to Michael, whatever he experienced in those caves, I have to believe he's at peace now, Linda told a documentary filmmaker who had accompanied them. The watch, the bones, the footage, they are all pieces of a puzzle we may never completely solve. But they have given us something we didn't have for so many years. The knowledge that there was more to his story than simply disappearing beneath the water and never being seen again. David, who had remained largely silent during their visit, added a final thought as they prepared to leave. Science can explain a lot of what happened here, the caves, the currents, even how his remains ended up miles from the lake. But there are elements that go beyond conventional explanation. I take comfort in that. Strangely enough, the mystery itself has become part of Michael's legacy. The case of Michael Abernathy remains officially closed. His death attributed to accidental drowning, followed by natural movement of remains through a previously unknown cave system. His pocket watch is preserved in a climate-controlled facility at the University of Oregon, still ticking despite all scientific understanding of how mechanical watches function. The footage of the Abernathy Apparition continues to be studied by researchers from disciplines ranging from optics to quantum physics, and Crater Lake itself continues to draw millions of visitors each year, its sapphire waters concealing what may be one of the most complex and mysterious natural systems on the North American continent. Park rangers now include brief mentions of the underwater cave network in their educational programs, though they omit the more disturbing aspects of its discovery. Near Cleetwood Cove, a small bronze plaque commemorates Michael Abernathy and the scientific discoveries that emerged from the search for answers about his fate. The plaque includes a quote from William Gladstone Steele's 1886 journal. "Some mysteries lie not in the absence of answers, but in answers that reshape the very questions we thought to ask." Beneath the plaque, visitors occasionally leave small tokens, stones, wildflowers, and most commonly pocket watches. Park staff collect these items each evening. The watches never seem to keep proper time. Rangers report that they run either significantly fast or slow, as if affected by some localized distortion in the passage of time itself. And sometimes, though no official will confirm it on record, hikers near the lake report hearing a sound carried on the wind, a rhythmic ticking that seems to emanate from the depths, counting off seconds in a cadence that doesn't quite match the flow of time as we understand it. Whether this is merely the power of suggestion, the natural sounds of the forest reinterpreted through the lens of a compelling mystery, or something more profound remains, like so much about the Abernathy case, a question without a definitive answer. What is certain is that on August 17, 1993, a 12-year-old boy named Michael Abernathy dove into the waters of Crater Lake and vanished. 11 years later, against all scientific understanding, his pocket watch was found still ticking in the depths, and in the years that followed, what emerged was not just a body, but a mystery that continues to challenge our understanding of time, space, and the boundaries between the explainable and the unknown. Somewhere in the darkness beneath Crater Lake, in passages carved by ancient volcanic forces and sculpted by millennia of flowing water, whatever truly happened to Michael Abernathy remains hidden, a secret kept by the deepest lake in America, counting time to the rhythm of a watch that should have stopped ticking long ago.